All right, welcome to our Sunday school service. Glad to see everybody here this morning. Before we get started, we'll open up in a word of prayer. So, does anyone have any requests they'd like to share this morning? Yep. Let's remember the all the homebound that can't make it here today, and I have one as well. Like my kids aren't feeling well this morning. That's why they're not they're not here. So I mean they're not really super sick, but I just want to remember them and hope that it's nothing that they could spread and make other people sick. I also see here that we still have that reminder in there about Vacation Bible School here this year. So that's something that we can pray about and be thinking about, like how we want to serve, wherever it is. It doesn't matter, as long as it's something that you're willing and looking forward to do. It could be from helping get the meals together, taking the trash out, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be teaching or anything. So let's remember that. Does anyone have anything else before I go ahead and open in that word of prayer? Yeah, let's remember those that have lost loved ones this week. All right, nothing else, I'll go ahead and open us here in a word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for this day. God, we thank you for allowing us to come here and meet together, Lord. God, we thank you so much for everything that you have done for us through our lives, Lord. And most of all, we thank you for giving your Son to save us, Lord. God, we ask that you be with these many requests that have been made here this morning, Lord, that and you would be with our country, Lord, as we continue to go through some trying times. And God, I ask that you would be everyone that's lost their loved ones this week. Everyone that's battling against this pestilence, Lord, and those are our healthcare workers and those that are caregivers, Lord, that you'd be with them. And God, we ask that you would be with us here this morning. You would be with our each of our Sunday school teachers and myself. That you would lead us through your word, Lord. That you would allow us to share the information you want us to pick up and you want us to have shared and applied to our lives, Lord. And God, we ask that you would continue to be with us throughout the service, Lord, and just allow us to turn everything over to you so that your name may be lifted up. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to look at Genesis chapter 21. So we're going to start out with the birth of Isaac. The birth of Isaac that had been promised to Abraham. It had been promised to Abraham many times, and he had been reminded many times. And here we finally see that, or here we see that God has delivered on that promise that has been given to him. All right, so let's look at chapter 21, and let's look at verses 1 through 8. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son, being 8 days old, and as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all will laugh with me. And she said, Who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah would have been given children suck? For I am born him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, And Abraham made a feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And so we see here that the Lord, he visited Sarah. There was that divine intervention there, that as he had promised, that he allowed Sarah to deliver a son. Just as he had spoken unto them, and we see that he had spoken unto them several times. In the book of Genesis, we see that he's, and again, we see that it's promised that at the set time. We can look back at, again back in chapter 18, we can see in 18 and verse 10 where he had, or where Sarah had over. All right, let me go down to 17 here, where he. I'm sorry, not 17, but 14, where he had answered and said, and after Sarah had heard and had laughed, he said, "Is there anything too hard for the Lord?" And he reminds them that at that appointed time will I return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And then that's again, he had told them it would be within that year, and so here we are within that year, and he's reminding that he's come just as he had promised, at that set time, at that time that he had appointed. And then we see that as God had requested that he names him Isaac, meaning that laughter. When God had told them of these things, they had laughed to themselves a little bit because it was so hard to believe, but also it was, I'm sure, a joyous occasion because they had wanted a child for so long, and God had allowed her to have this child as had been promised. And then we see also as that Abraham had went through the covenant as had been asked, and back in chapter 17. In verse 21, where he had asked, and started into the covenant, where he says, "But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah bare unto thee at this set time in the next year." And he led off talking with him, and God went up into Abraham, and then here he tells him he's been told, to circumcise. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born of his house, and were bought with money, every male among them of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin, the selfsame day as God had said unto him. So here he is obeying God again. He's the promised child is here, and he's going through the circumcision and following God as had been requested. And then we look at at verse 5, and Abraham is reminded, he's 100 years old when Isaac was born, just as he'd first been told, and he was like, "You're really going to let this 100-year-old man have a son?" And God intervened, and he did. And then we see that Sarah has been overjoyed here. He said, "God had made me laugh, so that all will hear." All that hear will laugh with me. Everyone's going to be joyous. They're going to be excited to hear what God has done for them. He's delivered this. He's allowed them to deliver this child in their old age, and he's done something special. They can tell that was of God. If they'd had this child earlier, they could have been like, "Oh well, maybe it was this," but no. She's well past her childbearing years. He's well up in age. It was all completely God, and so that's how they're able to share that and able to bring joy to everyone. So with Isaac being born, let's look at this next part, because this is going to deal with we're going to start looking at his other son. What happened with Ishmael. All right, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which had been born unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with thy son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. And all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. And Abraham arose early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot, for she said, Let not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. And lift up the lad, and hold him in thy hand. I will make him a great nation. God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad to drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. All right, so we see here with him being born, he mocks the fact that Isaac is born, and Sarah realizes that he needs to this previous issue comes back. He sees that he's going to need to that this needs to be dealt with, and she sees that, and so she talks to him and says to cast out this bondwoman and her son, because he may try to make himself heir, or make himself even with Isaac, the one that God had promised this covenant with. And Abraham, being a father, like it hurt him a little bit, even though it was something that he hadn't listened to God with earlier, and had stepped into that sin. But it was still grievous to think that he's going to to put his son out or put his son away. And but God come unto him and let him know that don't let this bother you. Sarah is right. You need to listen to her. And he reminded him that in Isaac your seed will be called. It's not in Ishmael. It's in Isaac. But God also lets him know that he's going to make the son of this bondwoman. He's going to make him a nation. He's going to make him. He's also going to take care of him and make him great. And so Abraham listens to God. He gets up early in the morning. He makes sure that he gets bread and water and gives them to Hagar and the child, and then sends her away. And then she wanders off, and as she's out in that desert, they run out of the water in the bottle, and she takes and in that heat she places him under a shrub, and she's very worried about him. And so she runs off. And it says a good way off as a bow shot, and I find that interesting because as we read on down, he becomes an archer. But within that bow shot, so a good distance that you're basically out of earshot, and then she cries out to God and lifts up her voice and weeps. And we see that God responds to her. And says, again, like, what's bothering you? And he says, he immediately answers with, fear not. Another thing that's comforting, and here's why, that God hath heard the voice of this lad where he is, and that's I circled that, and I find that reassuring because no matter where we're at, God will hear us where we are. Just as he's heard them, out in the wilderness, completely out of everything and broken, and just calling out and crying out to God, and he hears them. And here we see that he tells her to arise and lift up the boy and hold on to him, and he's going to make him a great nation. And then immediately, God opens her eyes and she sees that well of water. And so she's able to to give him that water and give him that nourishment and renourish themselves, and they're able to renew themselves, and he's able to live out his life as God had promised and become that nation just as God had promised as well. All right, so let's look at this this last portion here. Looking back at Abraham. All right, and it came to pass that at that time that Amalek and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee. Thou shalt do unto me and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Amalek, and because of a well of water which Amalek's servants had violently taken away. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet I heard of it but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, For these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, and they shall be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because they swear both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. With Abimelech rose up, and Phicol and the chief captain of his host, and they returned unto the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. All right, so we see here that Abimelech had seen just through what Abraham had done, and through what Abraham's choices were, that he sees that God is with him in everything that he does. His testimony is able to be seen, and so he sees what kind of powerful nation that Abraham's seed is going to become. And so he asks him to make a covenant with him, to swear and be peaceful, and he wants to, and he reminds him again of the kindness that he had shown to him, and that was back in chapter 20, where Abraham had taken the sheep and oxen and the servants, and that Abimelech had said that the land before thee, wherever you see in my land that pleases you, you can stay. And so he reminds them of just how good he had been to him, and merciful, and asks for that same mercy from him. And Abraham swears, and they make a covenant together. And as part of that covenant, Abraham brings up this issue with the well that had been taken away from him. And so at the end of this covenant, Abraham is going to dig this well, and it's going to be Abraham's well, and he takes out these. He gives him also these 7 these 7 lambs, and he uses these as his testimony that he was the one that had built this well, and in fact the name Beersheba actually means the well of the 7 oath, and so we see that it's sevenfold in that completeness that they had made this. And here Abraham plants that grove and calls on the name of the everlasting God, and so he makes this covenant, and God allows them to have peace, and he's able to live there many years and through many generations. And then let's look at the this last section here in chapter 22. We're going to see God's promise reaffirmed. We're going to see Abraham being tested here. So let's start by looking at verses 1 through 4 here. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt or test Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went out into the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And so here he is, where he's going to be tested of God, and we see that again it's going to be tested upon a mountain, and we see that that's happened several times in Abraham's life, where he's been brought to a mountain, and God has done some wonderful things, but it's also required some type of submission or sacrifice on Abraham's part. We can see that we're reminded back where he's called to the mountain, and he's called out of his people, and told that he's going to be pulled out and made his own nation. We see that later on that's where he's brought up on that mountain and told that that's where he's going to be separated from Lot, and we see that separation from Lot. Next we see that he's brought up to the mountain where he's told that he's going to need to cast out Ishmael and bring him, cast him out and have him away from his family. And then, lastly, we see here that he's going to be tested with his request to have Isaac sacrificed. And but we see that through his faith here that he knows that God had promised that Isaac would be his seed, and that his seed would be multiplied through Isaac. So he completely trusts God, and we see that he gets up early, he gets his donkey ready, grabs his 2 men, his son, he cuts the wood for the offering, and he goes up unto the place where God tells him. And we see all these things are pointing to, we're starting to see all these things pointing toward Christ. The mountain itself, that Mount Moriah is, that's Calvary. That's the Temple Mount. There in Jerusalem. That's where this mountain is that he's going to be pointing him to. And we see he goes off, and he sees this place afar off on the 3rd day. We see that we're starting to see these things coming together, even in these first verses here. We're starting to point toward Christ, and what's going to be coming through his seed, through Isaac. And he sees this afar off, and we can also see Abraham's faith in God as we come on to verse 5. So let's let's look at verses 5 through 10, and we'll talk about verse 5 here some more. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I will go with the lad, go yonder and worship, and come again unto you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son, and took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and they both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father? And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went together, both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. All right, so we see here that in verse 5 that he has this faith in God. He says to his young men that are coming that he's going to go off, and they're going to go and worship, and he's going to come again unto you. They're both going to return. And let's turn over into I'm going to turn over into Hebrews for a moment, because we see the New Testament writer really expand upon this. So let's look at Hebrews 11, and let's look at verses 17 through 19. We're looking to the faith chapter here. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, whence also he received him in a figure. So we see here that Abraham's faith that he could take and sacrifice Isaac, and that God would bring him back even from the dead. That's why he's not afraid, and he's following God and doing all these things and promising that he's going to come back with those men, that he's going to come back with them. And as we go through this, we see he's gathering everything up, and Isaac's wondering what's going on. We have all these things for the sacrifice, but we don't have our lamb. We don't have our goat. Or what are you going to sacrifice, Dad? And then we see again here that Abraham tells them that God is going to provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. And we can look and see that pointing to Christ, because we have the gospel shared with Abraham here before this point of the gospel. We see that God does provide that lamb. God provides his one and only begotten son. The son that he loves. It's at that same place where he provides that, and it's just this wonderful pointing to what is to come. All right, so let's look at the verses 11 through 14 here. Because we stop with Abraham, ready to do what is asked of him and slay his son. And so, all right. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thy only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold him, a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the place of that Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Right, and so we see him, ready to this, but the angel of the Lord calls out, to Abraham, and I love how that anytime that God calls out to Abraham, Abraham says, "Here I am. I'm ready. I'm willing to listen." Which also reminds me of of Samuel. When he was young and hearing that voice, and he didn't know what to do, and he goes on to Eli, and Eli says, just say, "Here I am," so that God's going to be ready to hear and speak, or let God speak to you, and God speaks to him, and here he is, and God says that you don't lay your hand upon the child. That through this test, that he knows that he fears God, seeing that he's not withheld his son, that he's not withheld anything from him. Abraham was willing to sacrifice everything that he could to God. That was the one thing that Abraham wanted, that his flesh wanted, that he desired for so many years, that God had given him. And he saw that God had given him that, and was willing to say, God, it's in your hands. You can take this if you want it. And so, because of that really impressed God, and we see that God, again here did provide. He told him not to do that, and then he hears that ram off in the thicket, and he sacrifices that ram, and then he names the place the Jehovah Jireh, which means that. The Lord will provide, or it also explains here the Lord will see, because the Lord had seen that he was willing to give everything to God and completely do everything that he needed to do in order to follow him and worship him. All right, let's look on here at these next verses here. Let's look at God's promise being reaffirmed. So let's look at verses 15 through 17. All right, and the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thine son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying will I multiply thy seed, as the stars of heaven, and as of the sand which are upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And so, again, he says that he calls out a second time, and he says, because you've done this thing, and basically turned everything over to me, or willing to turn everything over to me, I'm going to, in these blessings, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to multiply these blessings that I was going to give to you. And he's going to multiply the multiplying of his seed. And they're going to be as of the stars that are in heaven and the sand that are on the seashore. And he even goes beyond that and says that his seed is going to possess the gate of his enemies. God's going to turn everything over, to his seeds. He's given this promise, and he's reaffirmed this promise into him that they're going to have that promised land and are going to be taken care of. All right, now let's look at these last verses here. And it says, And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. And we see here that in his seed, and through his seed, we see that we're talking about Christ coming. He's promised this seed, and he's promised that Christ will be coming, and that everyone will be, and everyone is going to be blessed, all the nations, because of Christ coming and what he's done. Let's look at, again, this is the early gospel that's been given unto him. Let's turn over and look at a couple of places here in the New Testament. Let's turn over to Galatians here. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 8. And it says, in the Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the heathen through faith, preached before the gospel unto Abraham, saying, in thee shall all nations be blessed. And when we see that this is pointing back to this promise here that that seeing that everyone, the heathen, which are these nations, or these Gentile nations, are going to be justified through faith because of Christ coming through Abraham's seed, because he obeyed. And again we can see further here in Galatians where it expounds upon it even further. Let's look at verses 16 through 18. And it says, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed which is Christ. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law which was 430 years after, cannot disannul that it should make the promise of none effect. For if the inheritance of the law, it is no more of a promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. And so again we see this this reaffirmed, this covenant being confirmed by Christ unto everybody. We can see that again here in Romans. Let's go back to Romans chapter 4, and let's look at verses 16 and 17. And Paul writes here, therefore it is of faith that it might be by grace, to the end the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to that which is of the law, being the Jews, but also which is of the faith of Abraham. So that's the Gentiles and all the other nations, who